Welcome to the stage USC Annenberg Inclusion Initiative founder and director, Stacy L. Smith.
I still can't believe that happened. How many of you, just by show of hands, watched the Academy Awards? Right, well, I was watching, and I was actually a little bit bored. Truth be told, don't tell the distributor. And I turned it down, but when they were about to announce Best Actress, I turned up the sound to watch. And I was so intrigued when Frances started having all the nominees stand. It just seemed like such an amazing moment. And in that moment, noticing how few women, and women of color in particular, were in that room, when she got to the end and she said, "I want to leave you with 2 words," I thought to myself, when I heard inclusion, oh, this is going to be great. It's going to be like inclusion matters or inclusion's important. And when she said the concept I came up with that I had no idea she even knew about, inclusion writer, I screamed so loud in Beverly Hills, I think you heard me here, and that's why you came today. Now, I wrote an op-ed in 2014 for The Hollywood Reporter, and I'm convinced that no one read it when I mentioned the inclusion writer in it. And then a few years later, I did a TED Talk that's been seen over 1 million times. And lo and behold, guess what? It too mentioned the inclusion writer, and no one must have been listening at that moment. So I guess it took being on stage at the Academy Awards, at the Oscars, to hear about this very simple solution to inequality in Hollywood. Now, I want to apologize in advance. I need to tell you about a pretty serious problem. And I'm told by my students and the people I present to that I'm incredibly depressing. So I'm hoping there's like an open bar at the end of the day for all of you. But to talk about inequality, we have to get to the problem at hand. And we really need to think about not only shouting out solutions on stage, but not missing our opportunities. Because I missed a big opportunity right after the Oscars. I was called by one of my funders and said, "You need to make motorcycle jackets that say inclusion writer on the back." And being an academic, I missed the marketing opportunity, right? Missed the marketing opportunity. I'm going to depress you, but I'm actually going to tell you how to solve the problem. And if you're interested in working with the leading global think tank, which is the Annenberg Inclusion Initiative at USC, come see me. We have a theory of change to revolutionize entertainment. So let's start with the first question. How inclusive is Hollywood when it comes to hiring practices? The answer is very simple. It's not. Every year at the Annenberg Inclusion Initiative, we look at the top 100 films. Across 39,788 speaking characters, less than a third are girls and women on screen. Less than a third, 50% of the box office. 50% of the people in the United States, less than a third on screen. Hasn't changed since 2007. And if you compare it to a small sample of films from 1946 to 1955, there has not been change in Hollywood in over 70 years. Over 70 years. Now, what's important with these numbers is to not just think about gender, because when we say gender in Hollywood, we mean Caucasian women. And there's an epidemic of invisibility in Hollywood when it comes to women of color. If we look at the top 100 films of 2016, we cross gender and race, and we realize the bottom drops out when we start thinking about women of color. A full 47 films out of 100 didn't feature a single black girl or woman on screen speaking one word, not one. A full 66 were devoid of Asian girls and women, completely. 72 eviscerated or erased the Latina community. And over 90 didn't show a single female from the LGBT community. The numbers for disability when it comes to girls and women are equally problematic. So we're seeing a vast epidemic of invisibility. So not only are women underrepresented or erased, when they are shown, it's a problem. We see that females are about 3 to 4 times as likely to be shown in sexually revealing attire, partially or fully naked, and referenced in ways that are attractive. And this can have very nefarious effects for some women. Body shame, appearance anxiety, and we measure the degree of thinness, which isn't on this slide. It turns out that women are far more thin on screen than their male counterparts. And in animation, sometimes they're so thin that their waist size approximates the circumference of their upper arm. And we like to say that these gals have no room for a womb or any other internal organ. Back in the day, we had no idea we were making a vast political statement. Now, this is all speaking characters. What happens when we take an eye to leads or protagonists? Across the top 100 films of 2016, only 34 depicted a female lead or co-lead driving the story. 34 out of 100. Only 8 featured a protagonist 45 years of age or older. That was a woman. 8. But when we turn again to women of color, we see the invisibility. Only 3 films out of 100 featured a woman of color in the lead. One was Moana, and she's animated, so I'm going to say she doesn't count. So we're going to get rid of her. The second was a mixed race character who passed as white. Another problem. And the third, of course, was Taraji P. Henson in Hidden Figures. We have a representational roadblock facing girls and women in film. So when we think about these numbers, we have to think about how do you solve them? And it turns out that there's actually one easy solution to this entire problem in Hollywood. All you have to do to change many of the numbers that I just discussed is to hire women behind the camera. It's that simple. Personally, I think you should be erupting in applause if women are that easy of a solution to over 70 years of a problem. When you have a female director behind the camera, here's what happens. You have more girls and women on screen. You have more girls and women at the center of a story. You have more racial and ethnic diversity on screen. You also have more women 40 years of age or older, and that's good news, I think, for this room and myself. And finally, women behind the camera work with other women in key production roles. So we see a more humanized production process, which is going to be really important when you listen to the next panel, to talk about the safety concerns that are paramount in terms of needing to be fixed in entertainment and all the industries that individuals are working in. So, if this is such an easy solution, what's the problem? Well, the problem is Hollywood's not listening. Females are outnumbered in the director's chair. Across 1,100 films, 1,223 directors, only 4% are female. 4%. This number hasn't changed since we've been doing this study. And out of those 1,223 directors, only 8 are women of color. 8. 4 are black women. 3 are Asian women. It's actually only 2 because one Asian woman worked twice. And only 1 was Latina. 1 female out of 1,100 films. So we have to ask ourselves, what is driving this? Because we just can't talk about problems. We can't just admire the problem. We have to figure out how to solve it. And so if we think about leadership, and we take a look at theory and research, which we rely on heavily at the Annenberg Inclusion Initiative and what sets us apart from so many other groups, we try to understand the theoretical mechanisms that are driving inequality in hiring. And Eagly at Northwestern has proposed a theory about this very process, about perceptions of leadership, which is what female directors fill behind the camera. And it turns out, according to role congruity theory, that perceptions of leadership align with agentic or masculine traits. What do I mean by that? Well, things like being assertive or controlling or tough. These are our perceptions of leaders, and they happen to align very closely cognitively with masculinity. And when it comes to feminine traits like nurturing or being kind or helpful, turns out that these are pretty far away from perceptions of what it means to be a leader. And it also is the case that being a leader then is incongruous cognitively, whether people perceive it or not. These two things are incongruous, which has consequences. And the research has documented two major consequences of this perceived incongruity cognitively. First off, women aren't considered for leadership roles. They're simply not considered for leadership roles. They defer to their male counterparts as being the ones with ambition. Secondly, they're punished when they are in leadership positions. Why? Well, if they act too much like a female, they're not going to be perceived as being a leader. And if they act too masculine or like a leader, they're going to be punished for being bitchy. So women walk a very fine line because culturally, the view of leadership pulls very masculine. Decades of research show a global phenomenon called think manager, think male. We found the same thing, think director, think male. Matter of fact, when we did a study and we asked individuals to come up with traits of successful directors, many of them said that they had to be muscular. I don't know about you, I've never seen a director carrying heavy objects on set. Typically, other people are doing that, okay? Now, let me give you an example of this that just happened not too long ago in the Hollywood Reporter. Take a look at the headline. Warner Brothers is gambling, risk. That's a risk term. $150 million with the filmmaker whose only prior big screen credit was an indie movie of $8 million, Patty Jenkins. That little gamble won Charlize Theron an Academy Award for Best Actress in 2004. Thank you for her. So what do we do? People always want to know, what do we do? Three things that are important to do immediately if you want to deal with inequality, institutionalized inequality, structural inequality in Hollywood. First, you have to counter implicit bias. Implicit bias is kind of the go-to everywhere now, right? But there are only certain things that implicit bias is driving. And I would say supporting or small roles in film, background characters, supporting roles, those are really driven by implicit bias. People often see a role like police officer or firefighter, and they assume male. They assume white male. So we need something that counters implicit bias in the casting process. Secondly, we have to counter myths about what's profitable, because that's what's driving the lack of females in the lead. They can't open a film internationally. They can't open a film domestically. And finally, we need to democratize and eviscerate the cognitive view that's limited and masculine in nature about leadership. So in the last few moments that I have, let me tell you how you do these three things. First, sitting in my office one day, and I was thinking about contracts, you know, circa 2010, 2011. And I thought to myself, if an A-lister simply does one thing, we could change the epidemic of invisibility and the lack of females being on screen in 70 years. All A-listers would have to do is leverage their power and put a clause in a contract that stipulates that equality must be part of the process. And that's what we did. It's been adopted by Michael B. Jordan, Brie Larson, Matt Damon, Ben Affleck, and most importantly, William Morris Endeavor's talent agency, which represents some of the most notable talent. And this could literally take care of those two first slides where we really see girls and women at only about 30% on screen, and it could take care of the epidemic of invisibility. So what is it? What the inclusion writer does is it specifies how to slow down the casting and auditioning process. And it specifies that individuals doing that process have to audition at least one or more women and people of color in supporting roles. and report on it. And those supporting roles should look like the demography of wherever the story is taking place. So there's a compliance component to the inclusion rider. Now, we also have provisions for behind the camera. I'm not going to get into them right now. Unless this was a Hollywood crowd, I'd do it. But I encourage you to take a look. All of the provisions of the inclusion rider are written up on our website. And anyone in this room with power can leverage that power when they're negotiating a new position for others that need pay equality, others that need visibility. Make demands to bring everyone up when you can. The second major solution is an economic argument. We know in Hollywood that there's this pervasive myth that films with male leads make more money than films with female leads. This has been a pervasive myth for decades. The reality is, films with male leads actually have higher budgets than films with female leads. So budget and gender are confounded. They're confounded. We have no idea who makes more money. So in our lab, we did the most sophisticated economic analysis to answer that question. And we found out, looking at all of the information that could drive box office performance, that it was actually the things that matter most is how much money is behind a film, how many theaters that film is released in, and how well or how powerful the critics reviewed that film. These are the most important indicators. What's also fascinating when we turn to gender, domestically, having a female lead or not did not make a significant difference at the box office internationally. Did not make a significant difference at the box office internationally, or domestically. But internationally, films with female leads actually made more money. This was back in 2010. We're replicating now this study with over 1,100 films and doing this project with Reframe, so be on the lookout in the fall for us to be able to make the economic argument and also be asking for pay equality when we release the findings. Now lastly, the last thing we need to change is leadership perceptions. First and foremost, female directors need to be considered for jobs. We talked to 59 leaders in entertainment. We asked them, can you think of a female leader, or a female director, excuse me, that's on one of your lists? Talked to 59 thought leaders in the industry. The modal response, the most common response, was zero. People could not think of one female director in Hollywood. Our research changed that. We forced people to look within and outside of their closed networks. Now female directors populate consideration lists on Hollywood, and they should do so in proportion to the pipeline, both women and people of color. Secondly, we need to develop standardized criteria for interviewing and hiring. Objective and quantifiable evidence does not exist in Hollywood when it comes to hiring. We need to open up those closed networks, and someone like Patty Jenkins shouldn't have to wait over 10 years to get a job in Hollywood behind a major motion picture. Because she not only got an Academy Award for Charlize Theron, but a Screen Actors Guild Award, a Critics' Choice Award, a Golden Globe Award. There was objective and measurable evidence to say that she should be considered and hired for these top positions. And lastly, in standardizing criteria for hiring, we have to get uncomfortable. And we can't trust our gut anymore. Because trusting your gut may cause you to miss the most amazing talent who might not look similar to you, or come from a very different background, or have very different experiences. You might experience cognitive dissonance, and you might feel a lack of fit. But if you rely on objective information and have a standardized approach to hiring, then the numbers we see will change, and people who deserve to finally be seen and heard in stories coming out of Hollywood, that day will finally come. Thank you.